Welcome to the National Environmental Policy Act, also known as NEPA, introductory course titled Essential Fish Habitat, provided by the Florida Department of Transportation, or FDOT's Office of Environmental Management, or OEM. This training is part of a series of introductory courses that provide guidance on FDOT's process for complying with NEPA, called Project Development and Environment, or PD&E. Please see the Environmental Management Academy course catalog in the FDOT Learning Curve or the OEM website PD&E training track or other trainings in this series. Several of these trainings are referenced throughout this training. Please note links to all references mentioned in this training will be provided on the last slide. The purpose of this training is to introduce essential fish habitat and discuss the analysis, coordination, and documentation required during project development. Please note you may pause this training at any time. This training is comprised of 5 lessons. Lessons 1 will define the basics of essential fish habitat, or EFH. Lesson 2 will discuss how to determine the level of assessment required for EFH. Lesson 3 will provide guidance on actions needed if there is no EFH assessment required. Lesson 4 will provide guidance for preparing an EFH assessment. We'll discuss National Marine Fisheries Service, or NMFS, consultation as well as emergency consultation, and will also cover EFH Conservation Recommendations. Lesson 5 will detail documentation and commitments required for EFH. We'll discuss the potential impact of EFH on design and permitting, and we'll also cover reevaluations. Information on essential fish habitat, or EFH, can be found in Part 2, Chapter 17 of the PD&E Manual. The chapter titled Essential Fish Habitat outlines procedures for determining the effects of transportation projects on essential fish habitat. You may want to have this chapter handy as you go through this training. This chapter is available on FDOT's Office of Environmental Management, or OEM's website, using the link at the bottom of the slide. This link can also connect you to other chapters of the PD&E manual that are referenced throughout this training. Let's begin with Lesson 1. What is essential fish habitat? Title 16, Section 1802.10 of the United States Code, or USC, designates essential fish habitat, or EFH, as those waters and substrate necessary to fish for spawning, breeding, feeding, or growth to maturity. As indicated in this definition, EFH includes a wide range of aquatic habitats that are known to support fish at various stages of their life cycles. Examples of these types of habitats include wetlands, coral reefs, seagrasses, and rivers. High priorities for EFH conservation are called Habitat Areas of Particular Concern, or HAPCs. These areas are defined as habitats or habitat associations that are rare, particularly susceptible to human-induced degradation, especially ecologically important, or located in an environmentally stressed area. Examples of HAPCs include coastal estuaries, canopy kelp, shallow corals, seagrass, and rocky reefs. In 1976, the Magnuson-Stevens Fishery Conservation and Management Act, or Magnuson-Stevens Act, was passed to ensure long-term biological and economic sustainability of the nation's marine fisheries. The main objectives of the Act include prevention of overfishing, rebuilding of overfished stocks, increased long-term economic and social benefits, conservation of essential fish habitat, and assurance of a safe and sustainable seafood supply. The National Marine Fisheries Service, or NMFS, serves as the regulatory agency responsible for enforcing the Magnuson-Stevens Act. Title 16, Section 1801 of the USC created regional fishery management councils responsible for the fisheries that require conservation and management in their region. These councils are also required to develop and amend fishery management plans specific to each fishery management council's regions, fisheries, and fish stocks. Fishery management plans also provide information on habitat areas of particular concern, or HAPCs, located within EFH areas. In 1996, the Magnuson-Stevens Act was amended. This amendment set forth a mandate for the National Marine Fisheries Service, or NMFS, and regional fishery management councils to identify and protect important marine and anadromous fish habitat, and to establish means for designating EFH. Please note that Anadromous fish species are those born in fresh water that migrate to the ocean to mature and then return to fresh water to spawn. Title 50 of the Code of Federal Regulations, or CFR, sections 600.805 through 600.930 outline rules to implement the EFH provisions of the Magnuson-Stevens Act. These rules specify that fishery management plans amendments be prepared to describe and identify essential fish habitat. As per 50 CFR, section 600.815, fishery management plans must describe and identify essential fish habitat in the text that clearly states the habitats or habitat types determined to be EFH for each life stage of the managed species. They should explain the physical, biological, and chemical characteristics of the EFH and, if known, how these characteristics influence the use of EFH by species and life stage. They must also identify the specific geographic location or extent of habitats described as EFH and must include maps of the geographic locations of EFH or the geographic boundaries within which EFH for each species and life stage is found. Title 50 of the Code of Federal Regulations, or CFR, also establishes procedures to promote the protection of EFH through interagency coordination. As mentioned, fishery management plans, or FMPs, provide information on habitat areas of particular concern, or HAPCs, within essential fish habitat areas. There are 2 fishery management councils in Florida that regulate FMPs for 200 nautical miles past state waters. The Gulf of Mexico Fishery Management Council implements fishery management plans for EFH, as well as aquaculture, coastal migratory pelagics, coral, red drum, reef fish, shrimp, spiny lobster, and stone crab. The South Atlantic Fishery Management Council also implements fishery management plans for EFH, coastal migratory pelagics, coral shrimp, and spiny lobster. Additional fishery management plans include dolphin wahoo, golden crab, sargassum, and snapper grouper. When projects have potential impacts to the fishery management plan for a given EFH area, coordination with these councils is required. Interagency coordination is outlined in Section 305(b)(2) of the Magnuson-Stevens Act. As per the Act, federal agencies are required to consult with the National Marine Fisheries Service, or NMFS, regarding projects that fund, permit, or carry out activities that may adversely affect EFH. An adverse effect means any impact that reduces quality and/or quantity of EFH. Please refer to the 2004 guidance, Preparing Essential Fish Habitat Assessments, a guide for federal action agencies. For more information, further detail regarding EFH assessments will also be covered in future lessons. Essential fish habitat consultations are required for federal projects, as well as projects requiring a federal action such as a federal permit when such project may adversely affect EFH. EFH consultation requirements are subject to a NMFS finding pursuant to 50 CFR section 600.920E. EFH consultation requirements can be incorporated into the existing NEPA document, in this case through the Project Development and Environment, or PD&E process. On July 19, 2000, NMFS sent a letter to the Federal Highway Administration, or FHWA, and FDOT regarding how to conduct EFH consultations in the state of Florida. The procedure documented in this letter was developed pursuant to 50 CFR section 600.920C. According to the letter, FDOT is responsible for determining potential involvement with designated EFH and habitat areas of particular concern, or HAPCs, for a project. We will now move to Lesson 2, in which we'll discuss determining the level of assessment required for a project. During the planning phase of project development, some FDOT projects may qualify for the Efficient Transportation Decision-Making, or ETDM process. Refer to Part 1, Chapter 2 of the PD&E Manual for information regarding which projects qualify for ETDM screening. Regardless of whether a project qualifies for ETDM screening, coordination with NMFS is required for federal projects with potential essential fish habitat involvement, or in instances that require a federal action, such as a federal permit. To determine the level of evaluation for projects that do not qualify for ETDM screening, perform a review of fishery management plans, fishery management councils, and literature to develop an abbreviated managed species list and coordinate with NIMS. If NIMS indicates that an EFH assessment is not required, follow the procedure outlined in Lesson 3. If NIMS indicates that an EFH assessment is required, follow the procedure outlined in Lesson 4. For projects that do qualify for ETDM screening, this same process is used during ETDM screening to facilitate the NIMS coordination that ultimately determines if an EFH assessment is required. Preliminary information on EFH within the project area can be gathered from Regional Fishery Management Councils, also known as FMCs, and NIMS. The contact information for the Gulf of Mexico and South Atlantic Councils is shown here and provided as a figure in Part 2, Chapter 17 of the PD&E Manual. Each council has lists of managed species and EFH identified within their jurisdictional area and specific fishery management plans for the species they manage. NIMS Southeast Regional Office also has fishery management plans and managed species lists for the highly migratory species under their jurisdiction. This office can be contacted for more site-specific information. Additionally, EFH information from both NIMS and the Regional Fishery Management Councils is also available online. The fishery management plans developed by the Regional Fishery Management Councils and NIMS explain the physical, biological, and chemical characteristics of essential fish habitat. They also include information on species life history stages, species range maps, potential threats, and recommended conservation and enhancement measures. The amount of information available for EFH determinations will vary depending on which species may be affected. Fishery management plans also provide information on habitat areas of particular concern, or HAPCs, which were defined earlier as habitats or habitat associations that are rare, particularly susceptible to human-induced degradation, especially ecologically important, or located in an environmentally stressed area. The Fishery Management Councils identify each HAPC under their purview in their respective fishery management plans. HAPCs should be specifically discussed and addressed as applicable during the EFH consultation process. More detail regarding EFH consultation will be provided in Lesson 4. One resource that can be used to gather preliminary EFH information is the NIMS Interactive EFH Mapper, pictured here. This mapper can be used to identify EFH for species when projects have not been screened or if NIMS has not provided this information. It may also be helpful to use the NIMS Interactive EFH Mapper when developing a project's preliminary environmental discussion as part of the ETDM screening. However, this type of use is optional. The link to this interactive map can be found at the bottom of the slide, and more EFH information sources and websites can be found in figures from Part 2, Chapter 17 of the PD&E Manual. The district may need to submit a request for NIMS for a list of managed species that may be affected by the project. This is called an abbreviated managed species list. For projects that qualify for the ETDM process, NIMS generally responds during the ETDM screening with adequate information such that an essential fish habitat assessment can begin. This information can be found in the Programming Screen Summary report developed during ETDM. NIMS comments during the screening may also include an abbreviated managed species list. When a project has not been screened, if there is not enough information after a project's ETDM screening, or if NIMS has not provided an abbreviated managed species list, the district should create their own list using the managed species list available from the Regional Fishery Management Council and NIMS. Once the list has been developed, the district should send a request to the NIMS to confirm project-specific identification of EFH. It is recommended that each district send this request to the appropriate Habitat Conservation Division Florida office. The sample letter shown here is provided as figure in Part 2, Chapter 17 of the PD&E Manual. Confirmation of the district's project-specific species list will ultimately help to begin and expedite the EFH assessment process if obtained prior to or at the beginning of the PD&E phase. Please note, that the request to confirm an abbreviated list is not an official procedure for EFH consultation, and NIMS is not required to respond. If NIMS does not respond to the request within 10 days, it is recommended for the district to begin the EFH assessment using its own compiled abbreviated list. Please note that EFH should be identified for species on the abbreviated managed species list as part of the PD&E process. For projects that qualified for ETDM, the Programming Screen Summary Report and information from fishery management plans, fishery management councils, contacts, and from the literature reviewed are reviewed during PD&E. This information from the ETDM screening should be used to inform and guide the EFH assessment as the PD&E study progresses. Preliminary information for the EFH assessment can be found in the Environmental Technical Advisory Team, or ETAT, comments for the coastal and marine and wetlands and surface waters issues. It may also be helpful to review ETAT comments on protected species and habitat and water resources, as well as general project recommendations and anticipated permits. Any comments from NIMS are especially important. The Technical Studies Anticipated section of the Programming Screen Summary Report should state specifically when an EFH assessment is needed. During the ETDM screening, NIMS ETAT should be provided a list of the federally managed species that the EFH assessment should address. As illustrated in this example, NIMS reviewed the early project information provided by FDOT on the ETDM website and documented that the sample project area provides habitat for several federally managed species, including sea turtles, multiple coral species, and the small-toothed sawfish. All these species and their habitats should then be addressed by FDOT in the subsequent EFH assessment. The comments provided by NIMS as part of the ETDM process are a valuable source of preliminary agency feedback that can be referred to as FDOT develops the EFH assessment during the PD&E phase. Generally, no EFH assessment is required for projects that have been assigned a no involvement degree of effect by NIMS. These projects do not have a direct or indirect effect. Projects that only have indirect effects will typically be assigned a minimal degree of effect. An EFH assessment is generally not required for these types of projects either. As illustrated in this example, after documenting that there would be no EFH involvement for the sample project, NIMS stated that further consultation on this matter is not necessary unless future modifications are proposed and the proposed action may result in adverse effects to EFH. Barring any major project changes, FDOT's coordination with NIMS is complete for this project. If a project may adversely affect EFH, the NIMS will request that an EFH assessment be prepared as seen in this example. In this case, the request for an EFH assessment was made because the Howard Franklin Bridge Replacement PD&E project had the potential to impact submerged aquatic vegetation in Old Tampa Bay, including seagrass and shoreline mangroves. NIMS conducted a site inspection to confirm the existence of these resources prior to providing feedback on the project, and also requested that FDOT conduct a benthic resource survey to determine the presence, absence, and distribution of seagrasses and other benthic resources in the project area. The EFH assessment should be included as a section of the Natural Resources Evaluation, or NRE, and summarized in the environmental document for projects that may have direct effects on EFH. See OEM's NRE outline and guidance document for additional guidance on preparing the NRE. For projects that require EFH assessment but will not have a Natural Resource Evaluation, or NRE, the district will prepare an EFH assessment as a technical memo and include it in the project file. It is helpful to remember that information from fishery management plans, fishery management councils, and from literature review and contacts also serves as reference material for the involvement determinations that will be made in the EFH assessment or technical memo. As a project advances into PD&E, it is important to address ETAT comments received during the EST screening event. FDOT may contact NIMS to discuss ETAT comments and the FDOT course of action to address their comments. For more information regarding the comment resolution, please refer to FDOT's ETDM manual. Lesson 3 will cover actions to take if no EFH assessment is needed for a project. If the project is located outside of areas where the Magnuson-Stevens Act applies, an EFH assessment is not required and consultation with NIMS is not required. For projects located in areas where the Magnuson-Stevens Act could apply, but the project will have no involvement with EFH or no adverse effect on EFH. No NIMS consultation is needed, but this should still be addressed in the environmental document. For Type 1 categorical exclusions called CEs, or non-major state actions known as NMSAs, includes supporting information in the Statewide Environmental Project Tracker, or SWEP, project file. This includes information such as GIS, data analysis, tech memos, site visits, and knowledge of the area. Inclusion of this documentation will support the determination that no EFH assessment is needed. For Type 2 CEs with no EFH involvement, mark the appropriate box on the Type 2 CE determination form in SWEP and include supporting information in the SWEP project file. For environmental assessments known as EAs, environmental impact statements known as EISs, or state environmental impact reports referred to as SEERs, add this statement to the environmental analysis section as appropriate. This project has been coordinated with NIMS, and there is no involvement with or adverse effect on essential fish habitat. Therefore, essential fish habitat consultation and preparation of an essential fish habitat assessment are not required. Now let's begin Lesson 4, where we will discuss the EFH assessment and EFH consultation process. NIMS will provide comments during the ETDM process for projects with potential direct effects on EFH and may comment regarding indirect effects, such as stormwater from a bridge over a river that would flow into a nearby estuary. An assessment is required when specifically requested by NIMS or when FDOT determines that a project may adversely affect EFH. If an EFH assessment is required, then the following steps should be accomplished during the PD&E phase. Step 1. Address NIMS comments during the PD&E process. Step 2. Prepare an EFH assessment if requested by NIMS or if a potential adverse effect on EFH is anticipated. Step 3. Request consultation with NIMS and provide the EFH assessment. Once consultation with NIMS has been initiated, the following steps should continue to occur during PD&E. Step 4. NIMS will provide FDOT with a written project evaluation. This evaluation may include EFH Conservation Recommendations. Step 5. FDOT will then respond to any NIMS conservation recommendations provided within the required timeline. And Step 6. FDOT then documents the results of consultation in the final environmental document. If NIMS receives information regarding an FDOT project that may adversely affect EFH and FDOT has not initiated EFH consultation, then NIMS may inform FDOT of the Magnuson-Stevens Act requirement to consult and ask FDOT to initiate EFH consultation. FDOT is not required to agree to NIMS request. However, NIMS is required by the Magnuson-Stevens Act to provide EFH conservation recommendations, and FDOT is required to respond to these recommendations in writing regardless of whether FDOT initiated consultation. An EFH assessment is an analysis of a project's potential adverse effects on EFH. If necessary, it will include measures to avoid, minimize, or mitigate those potential effects. An EFH assessment is required if there are potential adverse effects to the EFH for the following types of projects: federal projects, projects that require federal action, such as a federal permit, regardless of class of action or funding source. As the agency with jurisdiction over EFH, coordination with NIMS may be required during the EFH assessment. Documentation of the EFH assessment is typically included as the last section of the Natural Resources Evaluation, or NRE. The NRE documents protected species and habitat, wetland, and EFH issues and can be provided to NIMS as an EFH assessment. For more information on when and how to prepare an NRE, please refer to OEM's NRE outline and guidance document. For projects that require EFH assessment but will not have a natural resource evaluation or NRE, the district will prepare an EFH assessment as a technical memo and include it in the project file.